Long ago, people did what they could to get by. It didn't get much beyond the three necessities of life. They grew most of their own food, built their own dwellings, and constructed their own clothing. Sooner or later, an enterprising sort would build a mill, grinding grains, sawing boards, and maybe creating textiles.
The river power was used with a wheel, a water wheel that would take the power directly from the river.
The Kimball's Dam and Mill, built in 1750, was the beginning of industry in Fitchburg. By the late 1700s, factories and mills were becoming common in England. Some brought their knowledge here. The first cotton mill in town was built in 1807, modeled after mills in England. A British worker absconded to Rhode Island with the knowledge of not only how to build the machinery, but how to house and feed the laborers. Another worker absorbed the technology in the new plant and absconded to Fitchburg. Rather than employ him, Fitchburg's elite swiped the plans and sent him packing. The mill didn't last long and was soon reused as a woolen mill. Fitchburg was getting ready to face the challenges of the industrial age. In the 1820s, two industries that would determine Fitchburg's place in history got their start. Abel Simons and John Thurston formed a scythe-making shop, and the paper-making Crockers built their first dam. The Putnam Machine Shop, which flourished over 100 years, came along in 1838. The earliest mills congregated along the river. Papermaking is an especially water-intense process.
The river was used for power, and the paper makers made these large reservoirs, so they had, nearly an unlimited supply of water because you consume a lot of water in the papermaking process.
The Nashua River Reservoir Company was founded in 1843. A series of dams creating ponds were constructed along the Nashua and its tributaries. The mills owning the water privileges could use water retained in the ponds when the river ran low. A dam behind the old Crocker Mill No. 8 is owned by the present occupant, Newark Paper. They maintain the dam. A small building, which used to house a power turbine, sits beside the dam. Crocker Technical Papers, just downstream, has water privileges from that dam. They use the water to flush equipment and for steam. Because the shop manufactures small runs of specialty paper, it uses as much water in a week as a much larger factory would use in a month. Crocker Technical recycles its own office waste and even paper from other mills to make their products. Pulp is shipped in from around the world, and trimmings from blue jean manufacturers in Asia are used to create a different grade. Today's paper-making machines would still be recognizable to a worker from the turn of the century. Can-Am Paper, which sells used paper-making equipment from their warehouses in Fitchburg, owns the Eagle paper-making machine, the world's smallest paper-making machine.
So this machine was built in 1914 in Europe for the World's Fair at Leipzig in Germany. An American company from Holyoke, Mass. Went out there and bought the machine, and they took it to, it's called American Writing Company, and they brought it back to do trade show demonstrations. So I can turn the machine on and make it run. It takes about 2 minutes for it to make its way from the chest all the way down to the reel as it meanders down through its different components. And it runs about 5 feet per minute. A modern machine could go 5,000 feet per minute and be 600 feet long and 30 feet tall and cost a couple $100 million to build. The machine starts off with a machine chest where the pulp fiber is mixed up. And then it goes over a screen to screen out some impurities, and then there's a little head box here. Fourdounier actually shakes to create an effect where the water can start to escape the wire. Paper forms on a flat fourdrinier, an invention that was invented in 1810, I think, by the two Fourdrinier brothers from France. It must be pronounced differently in the real lingo. There's a dandy roll here, is how you put the watermark in the paper, how you could put a name or a brand name in the paper. We actually had this made to say Can-Am Machinery. There's a vacuum pump to vacuum out excess water, and then there's a press section where you squeeze the water through the paper into a felt, and then you vacuum the water out of the felt, so every time it goes around you can put more water into it in the paper making process. As the paper is made, it shrinks, so each section has to go a little different speed. After the press section, there's a drying section where the paper is heated up and the water will evaporate off. And it gets down to about 95% fiber and 5% water. And then it goes through a set of calendar rolls to put a gloss on the paper. You get that shiny effect, so you can print it or write on it. And then it winds up on a reel. The paper we made is pretty crude, but we did make the paper on this machine. This is kind of like our mascot.
The machine at Crocker Technical dates from before 1950. Many parts have been replaced, and computer-based monitors check for consistency, allowing the paper makers to create dependable products. Daniel Nygrosh's business, Can-Am, was begun when he sold a used hydropulper in 1988.
It's kind of like it's like a big wearing blender, where you take your bales of pulp or waste paper and you put water in and put the stuff in and mix it up, and you get, in a way, a pulp.
Now he owns 3 former mills where he stores and ships his product.
Well, I think at one point there were 43 paper machines in Fitchburg, in a total of 17 paper mills. The Crocker Burbank family of mills had 8 paper mills. The Fitchburg Paper Company family had 4 paper mills, and then there was Falula Paper over by the airport. So, back then there were 43 machines, 17 mills, and today we have 2 mills and 2 paper machines. So it's changed quite a bit, and some of the mills are vacant or have been torn down, burned down. But some of the mills were just too small, equipment was too old, and the demand for the grades that they made changed over the years.
Prior to the 1970s, the Nashua River changed colors daily, stunk, and was thick with waste.
Back then, the river was used for bad things. Thanks to barium Stoddard, the rivers were cleaned up by the 70s into the 80s. In the early 70s, they built a dedicated wastewater treatment plant for the paper mills. It's still down here on Route 31. That plant, made paper making feasible. All the paper makers are responsible, corporate citizens. When the rules changed, they changed their game plan, and but all the mills had the same rules.
Today, water from the 2 remaining paper-making plants is piped to the West Fitchburg plant and then piped across town for treatment. The once state-of-the-art treatment plant is now a holding plant. Initially powered by water directly from the river, factories began to use steam plants as technology advanced.
So therefore, those companies were no longer tethered to the river, but they could be established wherever a proper site, wherever the land was available.
The Simons Company was one of the first to move off the river and use steam power at its Main Street location.
Corner North and Main Street building, the wooden building, was brought there from Royalston, Massachusetts. It had been in a steam mill venture there.
The Fitchburg Gas Company began in 1853, extracting gas from coal for lighting. It purchased a failing electrical plant in 1889. By 1904, companies were using electricity to power their plants. In 1947, FG&E was burning 75 tons of coal daily to fill the city's needs. The company pushed gas service to the residents of Fitchburg, selling gas appliances at their office location on Main Street. Now, the Main Street office is closed, natural gas is piped in, and the electricity is produced elsewhere. The plant off Sawyer Passway is long gone. Simons International, the great-grandchild of the Simons and Farwell scythe shops, is opening a cogeneration plant using natural gas in cooperation with Unitil, Fitchburg Gas and Electric's controlling company. It will be unveiled in December 2011. Metal and machine work has been part of the Fitchburg industrial scene since the early 1800s. The Burley drill was used extensively when the railroad lines were built across the United States and Europe.
The Burley drill was an early form of jackhammer that was significant in civil engineering in the mid-19th century, and it was used for tunneling and for canaling and for mining throughout the United States and in different parts of the globe as well.
It was designed and built here in Fitchburg.
And the company, the Burley Rock Drill and Mining Company, that produced it was actually a company that existed within the Putnam Machine Company. That company controlled and monopolized with the patents that it owned the use of drills in the United States.
For a time, the patents allowed the company to hold a monopoly on these huge drills. Fitchburg was in the forefront of research and design in the 19th century.
There was a community of technical expertise here, and people would come in from the other parts of the country in order to get the machinists and mechanics here to work to produce their products.
Ivor Johnson moved his cycle and arms shop from Worcester to the old Haywood Chair Company on River Street in 1892. The cycles were popular with racers and the general public. In 1901, President William McKinley was killed with an Ivor Johnson .32 caliber safety automatic revolver.
That we can start to work together. We are a great country, a selfish country, and a compassionate country. And I intend to make that my basis for running and over the period of...
Robert Kennedy was killed in 1968 with an Ivor Johnson 8-shot .22 caliber Cadet 55A revolver. General Electric opened on the site of the old Putnam machine shops in 1941 to build equipment for the defense industry. TurboCare, a Fitchburg division of Siemens Industry, was formed as a spin-off when GE closed its doors. It services the turbines built in the Fitchburg GE plant that are still in use today. This includes Fitchburg-built turbines shipped to Fukushima, Japan in 1971 and 1974. They were still in use when the nuclear generator plant was hit by a tsunami and earthquake in March 2011. No factory could run without labor. Housing was built near the mills, putting a dense population along the river corridor. As the population moved from the farm life to city life, things changed. Contagious diseases ran amok. Life expectancy for a white male born in 1850 was just over 38 years. In a poor family, everyone worked, even as they would have a few generations earlier on the family farm. In 1836, Massachusetts required 3 months of schooling yearly for children under 15. Illiteracy rates were overwhelming. Over the years, things improved. Massachusetts was the first state to require factory safety inspections. Hours were limited for women and children. Labor unions worked with mill owners for better working conditions. Other businesses grew to support the flourishing factories and mills in the 19th century. Goods of all types were sold on Main Street, and smaller stores served ethnic neighborhoods. Banks and insurance companies provided a good living for their managers and owners.
If you just look at the architecture in Fitchburg today, you look at the Victorian buildings that are, overwhelmingly predominate, and I think it shows you that there was a time of boom here in Fitchburg, and it's represented there in those buildings and concretely in those materials. But they are older now. They're reused and occupied, or some, in many cases, torn down. But we see that as as the past of the city. But just to imagine, how vibrant this community was when those buildings were established. Many of them for the workers that immediately needed the housing. That tells you that that's when the industry was at its height.
Newt Bullock, president of Fitchburg National Bank, built this home on Prospect Street around 1890 for his family. The 3-story home had fireplaces and central heating. Gas lighting, later converted to electricity, lit the rooms. Trips to Boston on the train were frequent. In his diaries, the banker writes of eating at Parker's, home of the Parker House Roll, in Boston. Ironically, he collapsed and died in front of the iconic restaurant. An industrial arts program was started at the Fitchburg Normal School in the early 1900s. The program, supported by business owners, paved the way for later Voc Tech high schools. Teachers were trained to provide instructions for students on a technical track. At its industrial peak, just after World War II, industry provided thousands of jobs in Fitchburg. Times were changing, though.
There was good old Main Street and people up and down going both ways at the time with their cars, and I can recall shopping and the liveliness of those decades, the 50s and the 60s. But thereafter, I think that the decline was more noticeable. There is new industry that comes into Fitchburg, but it's not the same. It's not the Fitchburg generated product, but it's rather folks from elsewhere looking for a place to, like General Electric, to make some of their steam turbines.
Still, Fitchburg continued to innovate. The new Simons plant, the first windowless plant with controlled lighting and a cooling system, attracted 18,000 visitors over one weekend in 1939. Visitors from the World's Fair in New York traveled to Fitchburg to see the marvel. Today, the factory creates products using fewer hands than in the past, thanks to mechanization and computer control. Workers in a new, leaner factory like Simons or Crocker Technical work smarter, not harder. Equipment is laid out to limit the number of steps material must be moved. Computers help workers keep machines running at their most efficient. Experience is valued, and many workers are second-generation employees. Even something as simple as sealing a package has improved. The use of a special glue gun is much more efficient than the older style, requiring several sticks to seal one package. The owners of both Simons and Crocker Technical create their products specifically for each company they service. It is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Welcome to Fitchburg History. This is part 12, the final part of a 12-month series. Tonight I have with me Steve Rocheleau, who's the president of Rocheleau Tool and Die. He's third generation owning this company. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Can you, tonight I'd like to talk a little bit about what it's like to run an industry in Fitchburg or the Fitchburg area right now. Could you give us a little background on your company so people know what we're talking about?
Sure. We, as you said, we're a third generation company. My grandfather started in Leominster in 1938. We were on North Main Street for many years, and then we moved to Fitchburg in 1975 in the Montezut Industrial Park behind Monty Tech. So we build machinery for the plastics industry, building machinery to make plastic bottles, and we sell around the world. So this area, being strong in manufacturing background, both in plastics and machining in general, is a great resource for us to have employees and suppliers that come to this area and really support business in this area.
Okay, now you have an ongoing relationship with Monty Tech. Can you tell me a little bit about how that works?
Sure. We're a smaller company, about 35 people, and I think 7 or 8 of the guys that work for us are graduates of Monty Tech, and one of our former employees is actually the machine shop instructor there now. So we've had kids on co-op, students on co-op, and recent grads that have come on that we've kept through the co-op program for full-time employment.
What's the co-op program?
It's a program where the kids go to school for 1 week and then they go out and work in industry for a week in the field that they're studying, so they get real exposure to manufacturing jobs if they're in that kind of a program. that they might not see. And you know, one of the hard things that we see for young kids today, I have 4 kids myself, and we see it, is they're not really exposed to industry. And manufacturing on TV, or everything you hear about in the news, is stay away from it. It's everything's going to China, or it's like this taboo industry, and it's really not true. Kids don't realize what's going on behind the 4 walls of a business. They know what goes on at school, they know what goes on in the mall, they might know what goes on in their parents' lives or their work, but they really don't, you know, they drive by an industrial park, they wouldn't know the first thing that's going on. And manufacturing today is such a high-tech business. The jobs that are existing today, maybe there's fewer of them than in the heyday of the mill years, but they're great jobs. They're a lot higher paying jobs than the service industry typically provides. So the co-op program helps get that exposure and gets kids out in the workforce where they can see where they can really make a difference and have a career path that may or may not involve going on to secondary education.
Okay, now you mentioned that you have a lot of long-term employees. Your employees come and stay.
We're very lucky. You know, we're in an industry that that we rely very heavily on our employees. We put a lot on them, we ask a lot of them, but we try to give a lot back in return, and that relationship is really paid great dividends. And lack of turnover, where you have people, once they know what they're doing, you can rely on them, you can have an expectation of them, and respect what they do all day, every day, and hopefully get something in return by that longevity of employment.
Okay, so being in this area gives you found a very good labor pool here. What other aspects of this area are good for you?
You know, for us, again, as a smaller company, we can't do everything on our own. We really have to rely on relationships with employees, but also relationships with vendors. We're in the plastics industry. This region in general is very strong in that heritage. A lot of the people that support the plastics industry come to Fitchburg and Leominster because of the number of companies that are here. So if we need help with something, it's not hard to get the right people involved on site in that face time with those people. So it's a big help. The chamber has always been a big help and a very big advocate of manufacturing. North Central Massachusetts is still there's a good manufacturing base with more than 25% of the jobs in manufacturing compared to less than 10% in the state in general. So if you look at this little area, there's a lot of strength in manufacturing, and the things that are being done here now are pretty neat. So if you get the opportunity to make some plant visits and see what's happening, it's not a bunch of people turning dials and moving widgets from box to box. There's some pretty neat stuff and pretty high-tech stuff going on that make companies in this area competitive around the world, because it's a global marketplace.
It is, and you were telling me the different places you do business and some of the benefits of being here and working elsewhere.
Yeah, we're fortunate. About half of our business we export around the world. A lot of that's in Latin America, Central America, Mexico, the Caribbean, Canada, but we have installations in every continent except Africa right now, so maybe someday.
Maybe
right?
someday.
Maybe someday, but yeah, you know, when people come and there's this heritage of plastics here, there's a confidence that they know that they're buying from a company that's here in the heart of that industry. It's a great access to, you know, you think about our location, it's not hard to fly out of here. Mm-hmm. It's a convenient place to have customers come into. It's a little bit of a ride to the airport, but not.
But that's going to improve soon, isn't it?
It's going to improve. The train, the high-speed train connection will certainly help this region in that aspect. So make us more of a direct connection to the rest of the world.
Okay, now you talked a little bit about lean manufacturing. How does being here help you be a lean manufacturer, or to help other people be lean manufacturers, other companies?
I think if you're a smaller company, you've probably always been a lean manufacturer. We don't have a lot of layers in our business. There's one person that does their job, and there's maybe somebody that knows a little bit about it to back them up if they're not in that day, but that's it. You really need, and that's what I was saying before, you really need to rely on every employee that's there, because their job is critical, or you wouldn't have it. There's a leanness to that.
There's a leanness.
So
Yeah, you made a comment. You've made it a couple times to me. We drill holes. Could you expand on that?
I think any successful business now has to understand what they get paid for. What it is, what's going to make somebody write you a check and have you do work for them. And it's not, we drill a lot of holes in steel. Our heritage is a machine shop, and we got into machine building. Part of what we do is manufacturing parts, drilling holes in steel and turning steel, and we have a lot of CNC equipment and high-tech equipment to make those parts. But we don't get paid for drilling holes in steel. We get paid because the machinery that we build and assemble with those pieces of steel solve a packaging problem for somebody that's going to make them money. They can look at that and they can say, I can rely on Rochefoucauld being there. If my machine breaks down and I need a part today or tomorrow, it's going to be there. I don't have to wait 3 weeks to get something from overseas. So.
And I did like what you said about you have a relational business. You have relationships with your customers.
Yeah, and there's a lot of our customers, especially in Latin America. Here, business has gotten so corporate. Everything is, sending out on the internet for bids for work. And if you live in a bid world, I feel bad for you, because it's a tough place to have to exist. So many of our customers, especially in the foreign countries, are family-owned businesses, not that dissimilar to ourselves, and they appreciate that, and they don't want you to send them an email or send them a tweet or something. They want you to be down and have lunch together in Mexico City. It's not easy, but
it sounds good in the winter to me.
It sounds good in the winter,
Yeah.
and as long as you travel south in the winter and
Yeah.
north in the summer, it's not so bad. But that schedule doesn't always work out. I found myself in Nova Scotia in January more often than I care to admit. So.
Let's see, what are some of the other things that we talked about, family? Some of the things that you have a strong group of industrialists that meet regularly through the chamber and
Yeah, it's a
improve
program
business.
that I really appreciate, and Dave McKeon at the chamber has really helped keep this group pulled together. But we meet with about a dozen or 15 manufacturing companies in the Fitchburg, Leominster area, and we meet once a month, and we talk about things that we may not be able to solve on our own, and we rely on each other as kind of a put together board of directors, if you will. But we'll have people come in, and because we, as a group, we can have people come in and talk about issues of OSHA or healthcare or workplace safety or things that we may not be able to solve on our own. But as a group, we can rely on pulling those resources together.
Well, that's great. That really is. And thank you so much for joining me for this last show. You've
thank you.
certainly, it's
you.
been a nice way to end off the entire thing.
Alrighty.
So
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're going to have our credits now. And because I didn't get it together to record any music for this, I'm going to do a traditional Irish song underneath the credits. Goodbye, Mrs. Durkin. I'm sick and tired of working. So. And thank you, everybody at home, for joining us. I've really enjoyed doing this show. So it's goodbye, Mrs. Durkin. I'm sick and tired of working. No more I'll dig your taties. No longer I'll be poor. As sure as my name is Barney, well, I'm off to California. Instead of digging taties, I'll be digging lumps of gold. In the days when I was courting, I was never tired resorting to the alehouse and the playhouse, or the other house besides. And I told my brother Seamus I'd be off and grow right famous, and before that I'd return again, I'd roam the whole world wide. So it's goodbye, Mrs. Durkin, sure I'm sick and tired of working. No more I'll dig the taties, no longer I'll be poor. As sure as my name is Barney, well, I'm off to California, where instead of digging taties, I'll be digging lumps of gold.